morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the Graduate Institute. We are so pleased that you all were able to make the time in your busy schedules to join us today. I'm really honoured to be hosting this conversation, this deep dive and exploration of how to think about AI governance. It's really nice to have this conversation right now. Just this morning, we hosted an earlier conversation launching the reports around thinking about the impact of AI in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals. This conversation exploring what it takes, and one of the big themes in that was legitimacy, public perception. And I think this conversation now, this exploring the topic of what role for the public, what role for us in thinking about AI governance is really the underlying preeminent question of what role will AI play in future transitions and change. I could say, as an academic, I could say an awful lot more about that, but I promise you I won't. All I'll say is I'm Emrys Shoemaker. I'm here with the Global Governance Centre and the Global Digital Governance Lab. We are an initiative in the Graduate Institute that pulls together the existing expertise and work within the Institute around digital governance, as well as being a platform for new, expanded and further work. We have a Digital Sovereignty Observatory, we have research around citizen-state relations and digital public services, and a growing body of work in that area. Underpinning all of that is questions around what the future of citizen-state relations are and governance. So it's a real pleasure to host this conversation. We've been hosting a number of conversations around the Citizens Track for AI governance, and I'm not going to name all of the organizations who've been involved in this conversation. You can see them here, as well as an even larger number of organizations and initiatives that have been supportive of, engaged with this conversation. The only thing I would say around this is, if a Citizens Track is going to have meaningful impact, it's going to need everybody to be working together. And I think the steps so far show that this really is the ethos that underpins this work. Again, I could say an awful lot more. I won't. I'm going to hand over to Tim, who's going to introduce the broader agenda for today, and we'll take it from there. Over to you, Tim.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Tim Davies. I'm from Connected by Data, but mostly working with PAIRS and the Citizens Track initiative as partnership project, which has been a real delight to work with so many of you on already, and hopefully involve many more of you in. We're going to have this morning a bit of content shared with you, but then hopefully lots of space for discussion. So I'll pass to Andrea, from the Swiss Ministry of Foreign Affairs in a moment, to give some additional opening remarks. I'll then take you through the white paper that we published today, or put online yesterday. We'll talk through the model that has for how we get from where we are now to an embedded Citizens Track in AI governance, with inputs from Susan and Rich, and then Octavia will lead us through an open roundtable discussion. And if you're not fed up by then, we'll have chance for informal co-working here on taking this into practice, seeing examples of participatory resources, not just talking about it in the abstract. So with that said, I will hand to Andrea, whose support has really helped us get to this point now of the process, and we've been very grateful.
Thank you so much, Tim, and thank you for everyone that is here in the room. I will not bore you with long diplomatic speeches, I promise. But I was just talking with Rich a second before, that maybe, because I said sometimes I feel a little bit like an imposter in these situations, because I'm a typical bureaucrat that has not a lot of technical knowledge. But then we were just saying that, a political discussion is very important, and the discussion, around these issues that we're going to discuss now. And I think it's still important that people hear, why Switzerland is interested in the Citizen Track. I guess for most of you, it's very obvious, maybe, I don't know. But Switzerland launched its guidelines on democracy last year. So we have said that we're going to want to have a foreign policy, kind of an important foreign policy point that is around democracy. And it is with this kind of view that we are looking at this kind of Citizen Track. And of course, also this is very obvious to everyone, when we come from a democracy angle, then we're looking at the questions around information integrity, and that a democracy can only work and function if there is an information space that is accessible to everyone, where everyone can talk, and where everyone has the same say. So this is really kind of the angle that Switzerland is taking. We also understand that AI can be used in good ways to kind of support this. But it's not so much about the use of AI, but rather about the governance and how do you govern this information space when AI comes into play. And why do we think that citizens' voices directly are so important? Those of you that know the Swiss democratic system, it's very obvious that we think that there's always an add-on when you have citizens' voices that are coming in directly, and that you can organize them in a way that they're making sense, that they can contribute in a good way to policy aspects of this. So the two kind of units within the Swiss administration that are responsible to organize the summit, which is kind of for us also a very important culminating point in this work that we support, are of course the Federal Office of Foreign Affairs, and then also the Federal Office for Communication. So we are working together with them to see that we can kind of advance this and make this also an important part of the overall summit. Okay, and I think that's already what I wanted to say, why we think this is an interesting and important work to support from our side. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And so it falls to me to try and summarise the paper we've published in as few minutes as possible. What is a citizens' track? Well, we've heard the word participation a lot already over the last 24 hours in speeches and other spaces. But participation needs to mean having a say and having power. And most people right now don't feel they have a say in the AI future, and they don't feel happy with the current settlement. Trust in AI is falling, public confidence and public excitement about AI is much smaller in most countries than public concern and fear. And that's a deep challenge, both for realising potentials of AI, but also for addressing its challenges, and for moving forward with democratic legitimacy, where people feel they have a stake and a say in their future. And the international architecture of AI is evolving rapidly. The year ahead is a unique moment of opportunity where we can embed a participatory and democratic approach. The first edition of the UN Global Dialogue on AI Governance is happening right now, and for the first time, all member states have a seat at the table, confronting those structural equity deficits in AI governance that have been to date, where just a small number of countries have been present and more than 100 have been generally excluded. But simply adding more countries without adding citizens to the mix doesn't get us all the way to an inclusive global dialogue. And so the Global Dialogue has its independent scientific panel. It's seeking to be a dialogue of dialogues. But in the preparatory consultations the co-chairs ran, these are probably too small on the... Oh, no, they're not too small on the screen to read. You might be able to read those. They're too small on my screen to read. A number of people responding to that consultation from all sectors were highlighting the need to centre the voice of the communities AI is affecting, from the grassroots, from all sorts of contexts around the world. And that's really what a citizens' track responds to. And as Andrea said, there is also this critical moment of the Swiss AI Summit. In the Summit series that started with the Safety Summit at Bletchley Park and has been to France, India, Korea, having that here in Switzerland with its tradition of democracy gives a moment to say, how do we send citizens? People in this room have been involved in those past summits of trying to get citizen voice in, but the door hasn't always been as open as it needs to be. So these give us this kind of unique moment into which we need to meet a challenge. And participatory practice, I think, can really meet that challenge. In a few moments, Susan will share with us what we see across the world in terms of public participation on AI. It's already happening out there. But the map here shows that the foundations are not just in the AI field. They're right across the globe. This is a map of 7,000 or more participatory processes across the world in the last 10 years?
Yeah, last 10 years, either funded by government or commissioned by philanthropy.
So there is a wealth of participatory practice taking place that we can build on, and it's an energy that AI governance can tap into, and an energy and a grassroots engagement it deeply needs. Now, in the report, we make a few sort of definitional distinctions that we talk of participation, which brings non-experts and affected communities to inform, shape or make decisions about AI-related policy, system design or technology deployment. And participation takes many different forms, from consultation, surveys, polling, interactive workshops, co-design, and so on. We talk also about deliberation as a particular form of participation that's ideally suited to addressing topics like AI governance, which at first glance maybe offer a lot of technical complexity or involve value-based trade-offs, rapid change and uncertain timelines and impacts. And deliberation involves a very intentional approach to who you bring to the room. It involves a learning phase to equip everyone for dialogue, and it involves really intentional facilitation to draw out multiple perspectives but seek common ground, consensus, or at least a clear sense of ways forward. We talk also about assembly, the power of bringing people together to engage in collective dialogue, and it is a fundamental component of social and political life. And assembly has been gaining, I think, a renewed focus in recent years as a corrective to the democratic distance that misinformation and other technologies force us into. And so assembly is key to this model, that it's not just large-scale digital mediated consultation, it is something that gets people together in communities, in collectives. And there are two forms we talk about in the report. One is community assembly, really local dialogues in communities, thematic communities, local communities, meeting online, meeting offline, but gathering to learn about, debate, discuss AI. And also the concept of a citizens' assembly, which is a more formal convening that uses the idea of a mini public, maybe matching the demographic of populations that can do deeper deliberation. And we've seen citizens' assemblies run in many places across the world. So all those things come together in the idea of a citizens' track as the institutional interface between this sort of ad hoc public participation, this wave that's already happening, and emerging architectures of AI governance like the Global Dialogue and the summits to connect all of that together. Which leads me to the concrete proposals of the citizens' track. Most importantly, we see it as a two-way street, not just the aggregation upwards of what's said on the ground by people to global institutions, but the activation of communities as allies in the governance of AI, by using invitation, engagement and resources at the global level to catalyse and support community assemblies on AI across the world, and creating the institutional coordination and interface that takes insights, ideas and recommendations from the grassroots into our global gatherings and global system. And in practice, that means we want organisations across the globe to be equipped to run informed, inclusive, impactful discussions about AI that have both a local and a global theory of change, supporting local agency to hold AI power and regulation to account, and that shifts our narratives, shifts what we're talking about when we gather in these global dialogues, so that we're much more anchored in the everyday concerns of people. We want a global system that has what we call docking points, ways of interfacing with that citizen voice. And we want to build this as a flexible partnership project that respects principles of plurality, where we recognise there are all sorts of overlapping regional, thematic and global structures needed to mobilise discussions on AI in all aspects of life, in health, in education, in all sorts of issues where it overlaps. And we really need to think about how we make this sustainable, not just one-off. So before I get just into the what we say in the report is needed next, I want to just briefly mention the theory of change there, the power-aware theory of change, that we say there are three strategic areas that respond to the realities of where power currently lies in AI governance. A lot of work in the past has proved participation is possible. What we have to do is show that it can be powerful, and we need to be really critical in how we design that. So we talk in the report about alignment, about the idea that we need aligned models. This can feed into the technology world and help us get better aligned AI models. Labs have done interesting work of kind of engaging publics, but they've not engaged global publics. They've not gone out to the diversity that networks in this room can reach to say we need our technology stacks to be responsive and aligned with public interest around the world and plural public interest. But we need advocacy as well that is aligned with the public interest, that the civil society organisations present in Geneva for these events are really in touch and in tune with what the communities they serve are working on, and we need policy that's aligned there too. But if we just wait for the big power holders to become aligned with that public interest, we don't. We've got a challenge. We need agency for individuals and collectives and communities. So the act of going through a deliberation process around AI builds people's confidence, their understanding, their belief that they can make a choice, that it's not just pre-given that you turn on the automatic note taker or you use that AI tool. You get an agency to question your own use, to come together collectively and question uses being imposed, and so on. And we also need to think about the accountability mechanisms. We can have all the global agreements we want, but if there isn't the bottom-up push for accountability as well, many of those will fall flat. So again, we talk about the models of social license, of audit and social audit, and how participatory process can work there. And also hard civic power, the forms of collectives coming and recognising where can they use the law, where can they direct funding, where can they take other forms of action, even action and resistance to forms of AI that are not the AI for good that people want. So we close the paper with an invitation to build and create this alongside. There is obviously three challenges. Funding scarcity for the democratic AI space is striking. There are billions poured into AI development. There are hundreds of billions in AI development, billions in AI governance, probably now hundreds of millions. Very little in democratic governance of AI and citizen participation. So we need to find the diversified, sustainable resources for that and mobilise them to those grassroots and that infrastructure layer. We need to really work on the inclusion and the global plurality, and we're really keen to make sure we're including all sorts of partners from across the world in the leadership, stewardship and governance of the Citizens Track. We're aware to date we've been building fast and we want to broaden out the partnerships for it. And all this also depends on having political will, commitments to share power, to get beyond technocracy and tokenism in our global debate, to actually put that space at the table for people. In the concept note, some of you may have seen that goes along with this, we also put some specific targets of things that would really make that concrete over the next 18 to 24 months, a vision to see thousands of recommendations and voices coming up from communities that we can understand and share, hundreds of community assemblies across the world, and at least one moment where we're bringing citizens together globally, whether virtually or physically here in Geneva, to make that much more visible and present. And on that journey, we see these three steps that we need to start from the fact people are already talking about AI. There's already lots going on that Susan will tell us about in a moment. We need to connect with that, getting global institutions to invite public input more and engage, but long term, we want this to be embedded as part of the system, the way it works, the kind of fourth branch of a multi-stakeholder system where citizens have that seat at the table in an ongoing way. So that's a race through what's in the white paper. The QR code takes you to the full thing, but all of that's been supported by evidence and research working on looking at what's already happening. And on that, I will pass to Susan. And I'll let you, John.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Susan and I'm going to be introducing the PAVE casebook. On the bottom left, you'll see a QR code to the interactive portal, which is a way of interacting with our data set. And on the bottom right, you'll see a very long academic citation for a paper that we've released, which of course, being an academic citation, doesn't reflect the order of labour involved. So the next slide, hopefully, will show a demo of our wonderful interface, where you can see the amount of participants and participation happening across the world. So before I introduce the interface that we're calling the PAVE casebook, I want to touch briefly on setting up the problems that it's trying to address. So the United Nations International Scientific Panel released a preliminary report shortly before we're all gathered here today. And alongside it, they made the statement that policymakers need scientific evidence to effectively govern AI. So I just want to say I agree with that statement. The second part of that statement is that by the time the evidence is clear, it may be too late to act on it. So this is the thing that we want to interject in. We want to say that actually this evidence is here, it is clear, but no one's listening. So, myself, Octavia and Tim, were involved in a project called Public Voices in AI, very UK-centric, sorry, typical. And 2 years ago, I led on an evidence review, which is published both as an interactive webtoon, where we kind of problematise what it is to include people and public voices in AI, but also the role of evidence and how public voices reach governments. The other outcomes of which also form this report. But the driving force behind this evidence review was to challenge what an evidence review is and the kinds of evidence that meets bureaucrats and, in fact, the technical people that are driving things forward. So typically an evidence review will synthesize findings, right? So it will go through the evidence and then it will filter out things it considers not scientific, which is hugely problematic if the things that are considered scientific and not scientific are based on a kind of historical idea of methods, of preference towards quantitative research and so on. The other thing we know is that in the participatory AI and research space, we have kind of infighting or disagreements amongst us about what kind of ways to do participation best, what's the best framework and what's the best theories. So we wanted to do an evidence review that didn't filter out on the basis of quality. We wanted to actually appraise the evidence out there that falls into an evidence review. So we looked at 320 examples from across the globe that had spoken with the public to understand how they felt and what their hopes and fears for AI were over the last 10 years. And it probably doesn't surprise most of the people in this room to find that most of the evidence that will find its way into an evidence review isn't very good at including people. So we found evidence of inclusion washing, which is the instrumental targeting of specific marginalised groups to suggest that they were accepting a technology. We found examples of inclusion boosting. So surveys will oversample for marginalised populations. Which is not a bad thing in and of itself, but then they didn't use any of that data in their analysis. They simply kind of collect the numbers to say they've spoken to those people. And then we saw kind of an overreach in terms of getting people into the room. So we saw that, people might make an effort to reach those hard to reach groups, but then once those people were in the room, there was no thought given to accessibility in terms of linguistic difference, in terms of thinking how you might talk to someone about AI when they don't know what AI is, especially 10 years ago. And then crucially, although all of these people might have been spoken to, their findings and their hopes and fears weren't making it into headline findings or recommendations. Instead, sometimes there'd be an acknowledgement of difference that was kind of thrown away as ambivalence, rather than entrenched inequalities really driving how different people think and feel about AI. So to go back to Tim's framework, which is listening, connecting and embedding, what we found in this slightly different way of doing an evidence review was lots of pretending to listen. So what we ended up doing at the end of this process was making recommendations for quality and assurance of the evidence that includes public voices. So rather than synthesizing what everyone said or didn't say, we instead wrote these recommendations about how to include people, how to be sensitive to the needs of diverse groups, how to incorporate differences in your analysis, report on inequalities and findings, and then to reflect on how you're serving the community you've spoken to, and especially to communicate these diverse perspectives in recommendations. So that feels quite bleak. Except that we knew that there was really good work out there. It just wasn't necessarily the work that was finding its way into these traditional ways of doing an evidence review. So PAIRS, obviously, is a great space to present research and case studies on the best in participatory practice. Here's a photograph of a bunch of people who participated and a side event to the Delhi AI Impact Summit. But notably, as Tim pointed out, when we're in the official stuff, in the main, this is us at the Great Britain stand or something, there were no public voices heard in any of the spaces that we'd been in for 5 days. So we were like the penultimate session, weren't we? So Tim made us get off the stage and listen to the public voices that he'd been speaking to in the UK. So this is what the Paved Casebook has tried to do. It's tried to provide this connective tissue, if you like, to develop an interface between the evidence of participation and the people who need it. And I'm going to go through some of the things that we've done to try and make that evidence and this participation visible to different communities. Okay, so I can't see what it's doing now. I'm going to have to turn around. So you have different ways of interacting with the data, which is presented by method. So you can look for citizens' juries. You can look for a project's goals, such as is it trying to empower a particular group, or is it trying to evaluate the quality of evidence? Is it trying to empower communities? You can search by participant location, and then there's this interactive map where you can drill down into were these things held online, were they academic research, were they citizens' juries, and then also you can look at things by level. So were these community level initiatives, were they at national level, or were they international? My cursor's not moving as fast as my voice is because I'm nervous, sorry. We also have a number of other ways to get involved into the data. So unfortunately, not all of the best projects produce the best videos. So we watched hours of videos of citizens' assemblies to find the best ones to show you. And then we also have this Tinder action of being able to swipe through like the highlights of projects to be able to quickly get through other people's voices, findings and recommendations, but to be able to drill into where they're from and what they said. This is a view of being able to interrogate one specific case. So you can go through the what of a particular project. You can see all of the different people that it spoke to. You can find photos to give you a picture. There are quotes and recommendations, like statistical information, when did it happen, who took part, etc. Then you have more information about the participant cohorts, if that's your bag. And then what we wanted to do, based off what we found in the evidence review, was to ask people to write these statements about how they thought that this particular example of participation was inclusive, but also crucially what they learned. Like, participatory processes are never perfect. It's very hard to include everybody. And so we wanted to be able to offer a space where people were able to share learnings. So then, finally, what the Paved Casebook is trying to do is provide this connective tissue. It's trying to take people back to the participatory evidence that we know exists and to put it in the hand of the bureaucrats and those technical voices that need to listen. Thank you very much.
So much, and we didn't plan, but then we suddenly realised, because we had to come up with an acronym to get university funding, so it became because you've got to always find the acronym. And they were like, it is paving the way to a citizens' track, and completely accidental, but it worked. Okay, Susan had the plan all along. But it's to that piece of how do we then go on and embed this, and there I want to hand to Rich, who's been thinking for many years about how to embed citizen voice in global systems. So over to you for a few minutes, Rich.
Yeah, thanks. Great to see everyone. And we were actually in this room, I think 3 years ago, when we launched the this permanent global citizens assembly. So thank you so much to the Graduate Institute, and at that time it was hosted all by the UN Foundation. The UN Foundation, thank you for that. So I think so in many ways, this incredible work that Susan and Tim has been describing is a reflection, I think, of certainly my best thinking on how we can try and connect these existing networks of participatory action into multilateralism. I think the first thing we need to acknowledge is it's difficult. We are interacting with a multilateral system that's, that's going through significant rupture, which provides both the opportunities for reform, but also the challenges of interactivity. And our strongest relationships at ISWE with the UNFCCC, just like 5-6 years ago, it was just much easier to do it. They simply had more capacity in their team to support those conversations, etc. So this here shows the UNFCCC track that we've gone through, whereby we have a civic assembly in the Q1 of the year, with community assemblies running alongside them, and then through the climate weeks, building the kind of the evidence base, as Susan was going to describe it, but in a climate context, launched that bond, which we did a few weeks ago. That's when that took place, the London Climate Week. Then having that negotiation moving into the kind of formal climate system. However, the existing multilateral system, and in terms, I think those 3 strands that Tim shared of alignment, agency, and accountability are really important right now. If we see the accountability mechanism as a classic, if you like, multilateral public sector component, the ability to do that really depends on whether you've got excellent partners, like we have in Switzerland here, whereas the reality is, when we're working with member states and we have populism as a condition of our governance arrangements, we have to be able to pivot and adapt according to the member states who are interested in having an accountable relationship with citizens. Obviously, many are not at the moment. And so I think particularly also in a regime around AI, whereby the private sector organisations, there's both real interest and commitment within the tech companies to want to work with citizens. That's a definite real thing, and there's also some that are not interested whatsoever. So I think having this multi-tiered track is completely critical, and I think as Tim was describing there, acknowledging our ability to support agencies. So for example, we are currently working with a network of European philanthropists called the Good Investors. They're providing microfinancing, going into some of the participatory events to be able to support the agency. But they're also taking the data coming out of the conversations, this was within a climate context, to be able to inform how they make their investments. So that's another track for creating impact. As another example, we're working with Climate Kick, who produce European-level energy infrastructure. They want to work with the Citizens Track in the climate context because it provides them with a more stable political mandate for delivering energy infrastructure they can't always get from the governments, whereby populists come in and sometimes may not be so in favour of net zero, for example. So I'm just transferring that kind of experience from the climate context. So that's it. I didn't want to say much more than that, but I think one of the critical components from my perspective of this approach is seeking to get the resources flowing into what works. As our colleagues from Socrates here, thank you. They're doing excellent work in India. And actually, the map that Tim showed before is not an accurate map of projects globally. It is an accurate map of the data that we have, the 7,243. There's actually many, many more of that in India, in China, in West Africa, many more. We just didn't have the data. So the data that map Tim showed was an accurate representation of the data that we have, but actually we know that it's limited. So fundamentally, my vision and hope for this work is that we get we've got the 93 examples at the moment. We can expand that to ideally, we come back in a year from now, maybe we have 1,000 in there, and we can begin to say, in terms of these approaches of alignment, agency, and accountability, what's working. Do we have partners, companies, governments, civil society organisations who want to help along those elements, and what are the mechanisms we need to be able to strengthen the Citizens Track in AI, become stronger and stronger against those methods. And I think that, if anything else, my sort of, kind of life's focus really is ensuring we don't delude ourselves through a kind of a languaging that we are having an impact. We actually, and I know that Susan and the team really care about this as well, is we actually really ensure we have the evidence for that. So in terms of ensuring we can give power and agency to the Citizens Track, is it funding, is it relationship with companies, is it relationships with member states that enables the discussions of these citizens to be able to have demonstrable change within the governance.
Fantastic. And I think, as said, we're at this point. We do not yet have that cycle, that institutionalized cycle in the AI space. We've seen it done in other spaces and built. We're at this kind of global dialogue moment. If we can connect back, if we can get this global dialogue to be triggering, mobilizing, motivating many more community conversations, if we can use the Swiss summit as that opportunity moment, maybe we can kickstart that cycle of embedding.